development of the vaccines is one extraordinary success. Obviously, less important over the long run, but just as impressive is the development of new antiviral medicines. And so if you look simply at the realm of medical science, you would say extraordinary success. If you look at the larger picture about how this has actually addressed the challenge that COVID faces us as humans living in the world, certainly as humans living in much of the world, you'd have to qualify that record of success and say, well, no, we've actually had extraordinary areas of failure. And I want to identify a couple. One really is more psychology and the other is more economics. But clearly by using names like this, we've moved into the realm of the social sciences, or as they say in French, the human sciences. And I think it'd be fair to say that for every success on the electronic side, the scientific side, we've had a failure on the human side. And the failure in many ways has been just as consequential as success. So in the United States, at least, many seemingly intelligent, well-educated people won't take vaccines. The vaccines would save their lives. Why? Well, we hear a lot of different things, but actually the best explanation is essentially politics, which is to say that if you voted for Joe Biden, you probably have taken both vaccines and you probably have gotten a booster. You are much less likely to have done so if you voted for Donald Trump. So this is a perfectly good political explanation, but obviously it makes no sense in another sense as an explanation of why people would do this. Why is my decision about my health determined or at least strongly correlated with the person I vote for? Those should be very, very different. So there's a failure there that we need to sort of think about. That failure is compounded because, of course, some areas of the United States are heavily Democratic and some areas are heavily Republican. So let's imagine I'm a Democrat and I have gotten all my booster shots and I'm living in Wyoming, which is a heavily Republican state. Then I am in some health danger because surrounding me are many, many, many more people who are unvaccinated and therefore have a much, much larger chance of having COVID and therefore spreading it. So this is not just a matter of politics, it's now a matter of sociology, which is to say my quality of life, my chances of survival are perceptibly lower if I, through choice or other reasons, live in an area where more people voted for Donald Trump than Joe Biden. So here you have an extraordinary challenge, and what it is, what has led the American people to have this response is we don't totally understand. We certainly have not been able to address, and therefore this is a failure, if you want, of the human science surrounding this. Failure of I don't want to blame people here. I'm just describing this as an extraordinary contrast. So look at the entire world, you see a similar failure, which is to say, we think the vaccine costs about $5 a shot. There are, let's say, 8 billion people on Earth. I'm just rounding numbers. So that's 24 billion shots times $5. That's $120 billion it would cost to vaccinate the entire world's population. That's a relatively small amount. The United States spent more than $2 trillion on plans to prop up the economy because of COVID. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway is 1.3 billion. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of United Arab Emirates, your next door neighbor, is, I believe, about 1.6. So Norway and UAE together could spend less than 10%, less than 5% of their Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is perhaps their interest income for 1 year, and pay for the entire world's vaccination. Now, I'm not. Because, of course, nothing like this has happened. The difference in vaccination rates in rich countries and those in poor countries is remarkable. So there are countries in the Middle East and countries in Europe where more than 95% of the population received not just one, not two, but three vaccines, triple vaccinated. The United States, for political reasons, is far short of that. Saudi Arabia is not very far away from Egypt, the most populous country in Africa. Less than 30% of the population of Egypt has been fully vaccinated. And that's 2 vaccines, not 3. Less than 20% of Ethiopia, the 3rd most populous country. I believe I just said Egypt was the most populous. It's the 2nd most populous. And less than 10% of Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa. So those 3 countries, which are enormous in terms of population, and therefore enormous in terms of their potential to spread COVID, tiny percentage of the population is vaccinated. So there's a failure of economics, because of course it makes no economic sense for us to spend all kinds of money on protecting ourselves from COVID if we're not willing to spend a comparatively small amount of money protecting our neighbors. It's a failure of politics in that certain countries have systems that work well to vaccinate people. So this is an aspect in which I think it'd be fair to say that the great scientific success is paralleled by an equally great and in some ways just as consequential failure on the social science side, whether that's psychology of vaccine rejection, whether that's the sociology of communities not doing what they need to do to protect themselves, not wearing masks, whether that's the economics of rich countries not willing to spend a little bit of money to help their neighbors, whether that's the political science of the enormous inequities in wealth around the world affecting human health. So the scientific successes have been in some ways met and matched and overmatched by failures in the social science side. Now, I'm not saying this to blame social scientists. I'm not saying this to praise scientists. I'm saying this to say that if we are to think about how we are to address the major problems the world faces, we probably need to think about a new kind of education. I focused on health. Energy is obviously another remarkable challenge. We need all the energy that is produced in countries like Saudi Arabia. We need that energy to be used in such a way that it does not affect the climate. We have to think about climate change, of course, the existential crisis of our time. We have to think about poverty. We've already mentioned each of these absolutely complex problems face the entire world. And there's a sense in which if we don't solve them together, we will not solve them. So my proposal, and it's a simple one, though it's quite a radical one in some ways, is that we begin thinking about graduate programs focused on the problems that face the world rather than the disciplines that traditionally have been used to carve up knowledge. In other words, we develop programs based on problems, not on answers, because we actually don't have the answers to all of these problems. So if I were in charge of a new institution or coming up with ambitious new plans to address graduate education today, I'm not in that situation, but if I were, I would propose that in addition to the kind of classic programs that produce specialists and specialists who own a certain body of knowledge, we also create interdisciplinary graduate programs focused on creating non-specialists who are able to work on the major challenges it faces. So sometimes something very specific is needed, and sometimes you need something much broader. When I go to the doctor, sometimes they say, this is exactly the medicine you need. And sometimes they say, well, we're not quite sure what's bothering you, so let's use a broad spectrum antibiotic. So I'm suggesting we need broad spectrum graduate programs. We need a program so that the medical doctors are not over here talking one language and the health communicators over here talking another, and the public are confused. Do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? What kind of mask? that we actually make sure that we have people who understand the hard science well enough to talk to hard scientists, understand humans and the social science disciplines enough to address those populations, that we really create programs focused on non-specialists, on addressing problems. And I believe that there would be an enormous interest in such a program rather than the much narrower graduate education we have. And I believe that once we had such students, there would be an enormous need for them. There is a pressing need for people who can speak and think and communicate broadly. And so my hope is that any institution that's in a position to think afresh, to make a new start, would be in a position to say, all right, let's try this. Let's try building up a program around a problem and then identifying the skills that might be needed for people to address those problems and creating a program that is much broader in scope that would complement, not replace, but complement the kinds of much more focused, much more specialized programs, which is what most of us have been educated in. So I hope these comments have been useful. I hope they've been maybe a little bit provocative. Good luck to you at your conference. And I'm sorry that the phenomenon of COVID, which is what I had focused my remarks on, have prevented me from being here with you. So God bless and have a good rest of the conference.
الآن المجال إذا هنالك أي مداخلات. ما في مداخلات؟ زميلات؟ إذن ننهي الجلسة إن شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا لحسن استماعكم. السلام عليكم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وأهلا وسهلا بكم في هذه الجلسة. في البداية يقول الغذامي إن العلوم تتقاعد كما نتقاعد نحن، وبينما نحن نتقاعد ببلوغ السن القانونية، تتقاعد العلوم عندما تتم الإجابة عن الأسئلة الكبرى لها، أو عندما تعجز عن الإجابة عن أسئلتها الكبرى. وبينما أيضا مع الأسف أنه بالنسبة لنا لا نستطيع تجديد شبابنا، فإن العلوم يمكنها أن تجدد شبابها بالتداخل والتقاطع مع العلوم الأخرى. وأبرز الأمثلة على ذلك الفلسفة، والتي هي أم العلوم، إذ دخلت مع اللغة في الفلسفة التحليلية على يد راسل وأمثاله من الفلاسفة، ثم أدخلها هابرماس في الدراسات الاجتماعية وفي علم الاجتماع. وفي اللغة كذلك دخلت اللغة مع العلوم الأخرى، فوجدنا علم اللغة النفسي وعلم اللغة الإدراكي، ووجدنا علوما أخرى متداخلة كذلك، لدرجة أن تشومسكي، وهو أحد أبرز المنظرين للعلم اللغة، يرى أن اللغة هي فرع من فروع علم النفس. وبالتالي فإن الجامعات والباحثين والأكاديميين لا بد أن يواكبوا هذا التغير، ولا بد أن يفيدوا من تداخل العلوم مع بعضها. سوف نستمع في هذه الجلسة إلى مجموعة من التجارب العالمية فيما يتعلق بالدراسات البينية، وستكون المحاضرة الأولى في هذه الجلسة هي الدكتورة هند بن سليمان الرميان، وعنوان الدراسة التي ستقدمها دراسة مقارنة في تطبيق البرامج والدراسات البينية في كل من الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وكندا، ومدى إمكانية الإفادة منها في المملكة العربية السعودية. والدكتورة هند حاصلة على درجتي الماجستير والدكتوراه من جامعة الإمام محمد بن سعود الإسلامية في تخصص أصول التربية، وقد تقلدت العديد من المناصب ولها إسهامات بحثية بارزة في مجال تخصصها. فلتتفضل الدكتورة مشكورة، وسيكون لديها 15 دقيقة بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا، وبعد. بداية أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل لجامعة الملك خالد وللقائمين على المؤتمر، وأخص بالشكر الدكتورة أضوى على تعاونها وحرصها على إتمام هذا المؤتمر، وكل فريق العمل معها.